It was a crisp Tuesday evening in Washington, D.C., and anticipation buzzed throughout the Capitol Hill studio where the American Forum, a newly launched primetime political show, was about to go live. Broadcast nationally across all major networks, the show's producers had billed the episode as a critical conversation on the future of democracy. But the real buzz wasn't about the topic, it was about the guests. On one side sat J.D. Vance, the current Vice President of the United States, looking sharp in a navy suit and red tie, his Ohio drawl polished but unmistakable. On the other was Senator Alex Padilla of California, the progressive Democrat known for his fierce advocacy on immigration, environmental policy, and social justice issues. He carried himself with quiet intensity and the moral authority of someone who had grown up fighting battles no cameras had ever captured. The moderator, Dana Walsh, opened with pleasantries, but it was clear she wouldn't need to work hard to stir things up. The political tension in the air was heavy, especially in the wake of recent headlines. The Trump administration had doubled down on strict border enforcement, sparking coast-to-coast protests. Vice President Vance had publicly backed the administration's policies, stating that America must prioritize the rule of law. But what none of the viewers knew was that Padilla had come to the forum with one goal: to confront J.D. Vance. Live, uncensored, and unfiltered. As the discussion began, the exchanges were cordial. The two men disagreed as expected, but there was an undertone of mutual respect. That is, until Dana turned to immigration. "Senator Padilla," she said, "you've been vocal in opposing the administration's new deportation protocols. Why do you believe Vice President Vance and President Trump are getting it wrong?" Padilla leaned forward, clasping his hands, then looked directly at Vance. "With all due respect to the Vice President," he began, "we are a nation of immigrants. The policy changes your administration has introduced are not about law and order, they are about fear. They are about division. Families are being torn apart. Mothers are being deported while their children scream at school gates. That's not America. That's cruelty masquerading as strength." There was a beat of silence in the studio. Then Padilla dropped the bomb. "And I must ask the Vice President to look me in the eye and tell the American people why a mother working 2 jobs in Los Angeles to support her kids should be treated like a criminal while billionaires who offshore their wealth walk free." The audience gasped. Even Dana looked stunned. J.D. Vance didn't flinch. He sat back, took a long breath, and nodded once before leaning forward. "I appreciate your passion, Senator," Vance began slowly, "but you're offering the American people a false choice. Either we open the borders wide open or we're heartless monsters. That's the kind of binary thinking that's tearing this country apart." Padilla started to speak, but Vance raised his hand calmly, never losing his composure. "I was raised by a single mother in a struggling town in Ohio. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. I also know what it's like when your job disappears because your company moved its factory across the border. That's not compassion either, Senator. That's economic suicide." The words landed heavy. But Padilla wasn't done. "You're comparing hardworking immigrants to corporate offshoring," he said sharply. "That's a false equivalency, and you know it." Vance's response was quiet, measured, but razor-sharp. "No, Senator. I'm saying that the working class, whether they live in Boyle Heights or Youngstown, are being squeezed. And until we stop playing politics with people's pain, we're going to keep losing what makes this country great." The room fell into stunned silence. Even Padilla paused. For a brief moment, it seemed like the war of words had reached a stalemate. But what would happen next would ignite a political firestorm across America. The show had only been on the air for 15 minutes, but it felt like the entire nation had paused to watch. Newsrooms were scrambling to clip the exchange, Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #Padilla vs. Vance, and pundits were already preparing their post-show hot takes. But in that Capitol Hill studio, neither J.D. Vance nor Alex Padilla cared about the noise outside. They were locked in 2 ideologies, 2 Americas. Dana Walsh, sensing the emotional undercurrent, shifted gears. "Let's talk about the Constitution," she said. "Many Americans feel our foundational principles are under attack from both sides. What do you say to those who fear that democracy is slipping away?" Padilla leaned in first, seizing the chance. "It's not just fear, it's reality," he said. "When a sitting president, he didn't say Trump's name, encourages political prosecutions, undermines the judiciary, and turns journalists into enemies, we are not on a healthy path." He paused, scanning the camera as if speaking directly to every household in America. "And now we have a vice president who defends these actions, calls it patriotism, and invokes his humble roots to justify authoritarian tendencies. But the Constitution doesn't bend for political convenience. The accusation was clear. J.D. Vance was enabling Donald Trump's return to hardline politics, if not outright autocracy. Vance sat still. For a few seconds, he didn't respond. The tension was thick. Then he spoke. "You want to talk about authoritarianism, Senator?" he said, voice low but steady. "Let's talk about mandates that shut down small businesses. Let's talk about tech giants deciding what speech is allowed. Let's talk about the DOJ investigating school board parents because they dared to speak up." He looked directly at Padilla. "You call that democracy? I call that a betrayal of American freedom." The audience erupted into murmurs. Padilla wasn't rattled. He was energized. "What you're describing," he replied sharply, "are safety measures, accountability checks, and the rule of law." "No, Senator," Vance shot back, "you're describing selective outrage. When the rules suit your side, it's democracy. When they don't, it's fascism. The American people see through it." Dana tried to mediate, but the show had transformed into a philosophical battleground. Then something unexpected happened. Padilla stood up. Not angrily, but deliberately. He walked closer to where J.D. Vance was seated, prompting producers behind the scenes to whisper through their earpieces. "This isn't just about policies, Mr. Vice President," Padilla said as he stood over him. "This is about the soul of our country. About truth. About decency. About whether we let fear and power dictate our future." J.D. Vance looked up at him, cool as ever. And then he stood too. Eye to eye now, their contrast was stark. Padilla, the son of Mexican immigrants from Pacoima. Vance, the Marine-turned-senator from Appalachia. Both self-made. Both sons of struggle. Both utterly convinced that their version of America was the right one. "You're right, Senator," Vance said, surprisingly soft in tone. "It is about the soul of our country. But the soul you're describing is one where disagreement equals hate, where criticism is called oppression, and where Americans who love their country are told they're the problem." He stepped closer, closing the small gap. "I won't apologize for believing in borders. I won't apologize for loving this country. And I definitely won't apologize for standing beside a president who's finally giving voice to the forgotten men and women of this nation." That's when it happened. A stillness fell, not just over the stage, but across the millions watching. Padilla didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stared. And for the first time in the segment, it looked like he had been momentarily silenced. For a few seconds, the silence was deafening. Senator Alex Padilla, a man known for his eloquence and relentless passion on civil rights, seemed briefly stunned, not by insult, but by the sheer force of J.D. Vance's conviction. The vice president had just delivered a line that would echo across the airwaves. "I won't apologize for standing beside a president who's finally giving voice to the forgotten men and women of this nation." Then, almost on cue, the audience erupted. Not with applause. Not with boos. But with gasps, a wave of sharp, collective intake that echoed like a tremor through the studio. Dana Walsh, clearly aware of the gravity of the moment, quickly tried to pivot. "We'll return to that in a moment," she said. "But I'd like to shift to another important issue, the economy. Both of you have very different visions. Senator Padilla, how do you respond to criticisms that California's high taxes and business regulations are driving companies and families out of the state?" Padilla, still standing but regaining his poise, took a slow breath. "People come to California for opportunity," he said, his voice steady. "Yes, we regulate. Yes, we invest in climate change solutions, public health, and worker protections. But that's not failure, that's leadership." He turned toward the audience. "Let's not forget, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And we did that while embracing diversity, sustainability, and compassion. What we didn't do is give tax cuts to billionaires while workers begged for paid sick leave." J.D. Vance raised an eyebrow. "Senator," he replied, "if California is a model of success, why are so many of your constituents moving to Texas, Arizona, and Florida?" Laughter rippled from the conservative-leaning section of the audience. Padilla smirked but didn't dodge. "They move for different reasons. But ask them why they keep their headquarters in California. Ask Hollywood. Ask Silicon Valley. Ask the biotech industry. The truth is, our state invests in the future, not just the stock market." Then he added pointedly, "Can the same be said about the Trump-Vance administration?" That was the challenge J.D. Vance had expected. And he didn't shy away from it. "The truth," he said. "We're not building a government that pleases Wall Street. We're building one that helps Main Street. Under President Trump's second term, unemployment has dropped. Wages are rising. And guess what? American factories are coming back online. That's what leadership looks like. This time, both sides of the audience clapped. The tension in the room shifted. There was still heat, still tension, but it had evolved. Now it was clear, this wasn't just a debate between two men. This was a battle between two visions of America. Dana Walsh, sensing the show had caught lightning in a bottle, asked one final question before a commercial break. Vice President Vance. Senator Padilla. In one sentence, tell the American people what your vision for the future is. Padilla answered first. An America that includes everyone, especially those who've been pushed to the margins. Simple. Poetic. Then came Vance. An America that remembers who we are, not who we're told to become. The crowd roared, half with applause, half with murmurs of disagreement. The split was clear. But the moment was electric. As the cameras cut to commercial, millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens, wondering what would happen next. And the real fireworks were just getting started. During the commercial break, the studio turned into a quiet whirlwind. Producers whispered instructions, camera operators repositioned, and aides for both J.D. Vance and Alex Padilla approached their respective principals with last-minute notes. But neither man seemed to be listening. Padilla stood by his chair, staring into the floor with a laser-sharp gaze, running through potential arguments in his mind. His team had warned him about Vance's rhetorical skill, how he could blend populism and patriotism into a powerful cocktail. But seeing it firsthand was different. Vance had managed to appear as both fighter and statesman, blending the steel of Middle America with the polish of Washington. Meanwhile, Vance remained seated, adjusting his earpiece with calm precision. He glanced at his notes briefly, then smiled to himself. He had landed his punches, but he knew Padilla wasn't done yet. The California senator was known to rally late, often with emotional force. Back on air, Dana Walsh welcomed viewers with a refreshed tone. "We're back," she said. "And so is the energy in the room. We now turn to one of the most controversial issues of this administration, voting rights and election integrity." Padilla straightened. This was his home turf. In 2020 and again in 2024, we saw unprecedented attacks on the legitimacy of our elections, he began. And in response, states, many led by this administration's allies, introduced laws that made it harder to vote, particularly for minorities, the elderly, and the poor. That's not election integrity. That's voter suppression wrapped in patriotic language. J.D. Vance nodded, as if expecting the attack. "Respectfully, Senator," he replied. "What you call voter suppression, I call basic security. We want one person, one vote, and a system that prevents fraud, not one that invites it. That's not racism. That's common sense." Padilla leaned forward, fire in his voice. Dana Walsh cleared her throat, aware that millions of eyes were watching. "We've covered immigration, the economy, voting rights. But let me end with something deeper, something personal," she said. Then she looked at both men. "What is your greatest fear for America's future?" Neither J.D. Vance nor Alex Padilla answered immediately. The question pierced past politics, it reached something intimate, something neither had fully rehearsed. Padilla spoke first. "My greatest fear," he said, "is that we stop listening. That we stop seeing each other as neighbors and start seeing each other as enemies." He glanced toward Vance, not with animosity but with solemnity. "We have different ideologies, yes. But when we treat disagreement as treason, when we label our fellow Americans as threats because they pray differently or vote differently, we risk losing the very soul of our democracy. Not through war, but through indifference." The room was still. Then J.D. Vance, who had maintained a stoic posture all night, did something unexpected. He sighed deeply and softened. "My greatest fear," he said, "is that my kids will grow up in an America that forgot how to dream." He looked directly into the camera. "I come from Middletown, Ohio. I watched friends die of overdoses. I saw families destroyed by despair. I saw a country where entire towns gave up on themselves because no one in D.C. cared." Then he turned to Padilla. "You and I grew up in different zip codes, Senator. But I think we both know what it's like to come from places politicians usually ignore." Padilla nodded, just barely, but enough. Vance continued, now dropping his guard entirely. "I never ran for office to become a talking head or a culture warrior. I ran because I believed that forgotten communities, whether they're in South Central LA or Southern Ohio, deserve better." Then he dropped his voice slightly. "I fear that if we don't find a way to bridge our divides, we'll leave our children with a country so fractured that no president, Republican or Democrat, can fix it. The words hung in the air like fog. For the first time all night, there were no interruptions, no rebuttals. Just silence. Dana looked back and forth between the two men, surprised by the vulnerability. And then, unexpectedly, Alex Padilla reached out his hand across the table. "I still disagree with nearly every policy you defend," he said. Vance smiled. "And I still think California is a disaster." The crowd chuckled, softly at first, then with genuine warmth. "But," Padilla added, "if you're willing to meet in the middle, not just here, but out there with the people, I am too." Vance extended his hand fully and shook it. The studio audience stood to their feet. Not a standing ovation in celebration, but in recognition, in relief, as if the entire country had just been reminded that civil discourse wasn't extinct. Later that evening, clips of the handshake went viral. One headline read, "Padilla and Vance clash on everything but end with a moment America needed." Another said, "Silence in the studio, J.D. Vance's one sentence that changed the tone of the debate." Social media exploded. Some called it political theater. Others called it hope. But one tweet from a retired schoolteacher in Iowa summed it up best. "I don't agree with either of them completely. But tonight I saw something rare, leaders who fought hard then listened harder. Maybe we still have a shot." In the days that followed, the two offices released a rare joint statement. It didn't announce a new policy. It didn't promise legislative miracles. It simply read, "We believe in a better America. We disagree, but we will not demonize. We will fight, but we will not hate. Because the country our parents believed in deserves that much and more." And for a moment, just a moment, Americans believed it too.